It began with a whisper, an overheard comment in a marble hallway, a cryptic line muttered by Princess Anne after a private meeting with the king. She left more than just memories, she said. That was the moment the floodgates creaked open. A trail of secrets, dormant for decades, now threatened to upend royal history, beginning with a truth buried in the Queen Mother's sealed vault. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The palace had long mastered the art of silence, but on that cold afternoon, in a corridor where secrets once dissolved into chandeliers and polished wood, Anne heard something that froze her in place. A pair of aides, unaware of her presence, whispered about a misfiled document, a document that, according to one of them, should never have reached her hands. Within hours, Anne found herself in possession of a sealed envelope, its wax crest still intact, its contents misdirected and explosive. The document inside mentioned not titles, not properties, but offshore accounts and unaudited royal assets tied to her late grandmother, the Queen Mother. Anne's hands trembled as she read the vague yet unmistakable hints at a financial network one never recorded in the official Crown archives. Words like silent estates, non-disclosed beneficiaries, and private ledger holdings blurred before her eyes. This wasn't some mere financial oversight. It was a hidden system designed to conceal. And as the daughter who had watched generations serve, fall, and rise under royal duty, Anne felt betrayed not just by the system, but by her own bloodline. She turned to the royal accountants, quietly asking for transaction patterns that stretched back decades. What she received confirmed her worst fear: unexplained withdrawals, paper trails that led to shuttered institutions in Switzerland and untraceable trusts in Canada. The deeper she dug, the louder the silence from her brother grew. Charles, once eager to share everything from coronation plans to family charity audits, now stiffened when she mentioned anything about the Queen Mother's final years. Their private conversations, once steeped in shared memories, turned cold and cautious. He deflected, changed the subject, or told her to focus on ceremonial duties. But Anne wasn't built for ceremony, she was built for truth. And truth, she realized, had no place in the rooms where portraits of ancestors watched with hollow eyes. It wasn't only the money, it was what it symbolized: trust lost, transparency denied, and more than anything, the realization that someone, perhaps more than one, had been part of protecting a legacy kept in the shadows. Anne's instincts screamed louder than ever. This wasn't just a family discrepancy. This was the prelude to something vast, something dangerous, and something that could fracture the very image the monarchy had carefully curated for decades. But Anne wasn't just asking questions, she was following a trail, and what she found next would tear through the very foundation of royal trust. Behind the veil of tiaras and tea, the Queen Mother operated like a shadowed chess master, pulling strings and sealing away wealth far from prying eyes. What Anne discovered was more than inheritance. It was a covert empire scattered across offshore accounts, private holdings, and anonymous trusts, all bypassing the Crown's official ledgers. The revelations didn't come all at once. They trickled in like coded whispers buried deep within forgotten files and misdated letters. Anne, obsessed now, combed through everything: old trunks, personal diaries, wartime correspondences. That's when she first stumbled upon a string of bank names: Liechtenstein, Geneva, and the Caymans, scribbled not in financial records, but in the margins of her grandmother's journal, concealed under ink that only revealed itself with heat. These weren't just accounts, they were vaults of secrets. Decades of unexplained assets moved discreetly, always just beneath the surface of royal scrutiny. And they weren't simply savings, they were part of something larger. A network. A plan. A protection system rooted not in loyalty to the Crown, but in preservation of personal control. The trail became more chilling when Anne uncovered a name that had never appeared in any public document: the Mariner. A discreet financial advisor who had corresponded with the Queen Mother through coded telegrams and handwritten notes. He was a ghost within the royal financial network, orchestrating post-war transfers through shell companies that routed Crown-linked funds away from Buckingham and into silent vaults overseas. These transfers weren't just clever, they were deliberate, timed perfectly during historical distractions, coronations, and diplomatic upheavals when no one would question her movements. The Queen Mother, revered for her grace, had engineered a financial underworld that no one dared suspect. Anne's heart sank further when she discovered that rare royal jewels once believed to be gifted to museums or lent to foreign dignitaries had quietly disappeared over the years. Some reappeared briefly at discreet auctions in Hong Kong and Paris, sold under aliases and bundled with rare art pieces traced back to Windsor storage. There were no records of these departures, no signatures, no permissions, only the Queen Mother's careful hand in the shadows. And the proceeds? Redirected quietly, feeding into the same offshore accounts, layered and protected by laws immune to British jurisdiction. Every new document added another layer of betrayal. Every ciphered page another reason for Anne to wonder who else knew. Yet, even in the darkest corridors of deception, the Queen Mother left a trail only Anne could decipher deliberately or unintentionally. Coded letters folded within her private diaries revealed key names, coordinates, and disjointed reflections. Some hinted at distrust of the system. Others read like confessions. One phrase repeated again and again, "Protect what they cannot see." The implication was clear. These hidden fortunes weren't simply escape hatches, they were her insurance policy, her hedge against a royal future she didn't fully believe in. But what truly stung Anne wasn't the secrecy, it was who the Queen Mother chose as the sole heir to this veiled fortune. While the monarchy watched Catherine rise with elegance, few realized how deeply rooted her place had become. Not by marriage alone, but by legacy. Anne's heart skipped as she decoded the Queen Mother's final directive. Every penny, every vault key, every untouched fortune would be transferred not to Charles, not to Camilla, but to Catherine. The revelation was not buried in grand declarations or gold-sealed parchments. It lay within the final pages of a private legal dossier Anne found tucked beneath an embroidered cloth in the Queen Mother's bureau. Signed, witnessed, and devastating. The Queen Mother's signature was unmistakable, her intent unclouded. Catherine was named as the sole beneficiary. No shares split among siblings, no ceremonial tokens for tradition's sake. It was absolute. In Anne's hands, that one signature rewrote the family's internal hierarchy, and possibly its future. Alongside the legal transfer lay a handwritten note from the Queen Mother herself. A short letter, penned with graceful curves and deliberate ink, praising Catherine's grace under pressure and her dignity fit for reign. Anne read those words twice, then a third time. Each syllable pressed like a weight on her chest. She respected Catherine. But to be the chosen one, above all others? Her mind drifted back to a quiet morning, nearly a year before the Queen Mother's passing. A rare, private tea between her and Catherine. No aides, no Charles. Just the two women and a silence that felt more like scrutiny. Anne hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now, that meeting pulsed with new meaning. What had they discussed? What had the Queen Mother seen in Catherine that convinced her to bypass every convention, every unspoken rule of bloodline succession? Was it admiration, a strategic decision, or something deeper? For Anne, it was a paradox. She found herself torn between awe and ache. The Queen Mother, who had raised them in a world of duty and decorum, had made her final judgment, and Anne wasn't in it. Behind palace doors, quiet chaos brewed. Charles was seen, in terse conversation with palace legal teams, voices low but faces red. One senior advisor referred to it as the will no one expected. Camilla, uncharacteristically cold, withdrew from 2 public engagements and offered no explanation. Whispers began to circulate among staff that she'd been blindsided, even humiliated. The corridors, once filled with protocol and predictability, were now dripping with suspicion. Catherine remained silent, dignified, measured. But even her silence stung. Was it humility or calculation? No one could tell. What began as inheritance now mutated into interpretation. Was this favoritism, or was it the Queen Mother's prophecy? Camilla reportedly referred to it privately as a staged coronation in ink. The divide between her and Catherine widened, not in public appearances but behind tightly closed doors. Glances turned sharper, words became veiled, and in the heart of it stood Anne, holding the truth that could fracture them all. But Catherine's inheritance was only the beginning, because what Anne did next turned a private matter into a royal reckoning. She entered the king's study like a storm wrapped in silk. For decades, Anne had played the loyal sister, but now she stood armed with documents, secrets, and the unmistakable scent of betrayal. "You knew," she accused, but it was his silence that roared louder than any denial. The moment the heavy doors closed behind her, Anne unleashed years of restrained fury. The dossier was slammed onto the king's mahogany desk with enough force to rattle the crystal inkpot beside him. Charles looked up, weary yet cautious, the weight of the crown suddenly feeling insufficient against the fire in his sister's eyes. Anne had never been one for dramatics, which made her presence now all the more dangerous. She began to lay out the accounts, the bank names, the coded letters, the offshore transactions, and the Queen Mother's final declaration favouring Catherine. Every word from her mouth carried the sharpness of betrayal. At first Charles leaned back, quiet, trying to gather the composure of a monarch. But then came the dreaded pause, one beat too long, a pause that told Anne everything. Charles denied prior knowledge, but his words lacked weight. His tone was not of surprise, but of exhaustion. Anne caught it instantly. "Don't lie to me," she hissed. "You buried this because it didn't fit your version of royal order." What followed was something rare, an unfiltered, furious clash between two of the crown's oldest pillars. Voices rose, once in sharp words, then in fury. Staff outside the study froze as the unmistakable sound of shouting echoed through the corridor. The calm, composed Princess Royal and the measured, restrained king now unravelling in a brutal confrontation that was decades in the making. Charles eventually confessed not to knowledge of every account, but to suspicions he chose not to pursue. His fear wasn't about the legality, it was about perception. He worried how Camilla would react, how the press would feast on the revelation that Catherine, not his wife, was the chosen one. But Anne wasn't interested in optics. She was interested in truth. "You're not protecting the crown," she snapped. "You're protecting egos." The final blow came when she looked him in the eye and whispered what he couldn't admit aloud: Mummy trusted Catherine more than her own son. That line cut deeper than any accusation. The king turned away, but the damage had been done. Anne gave him one chance to act, to reveal the truth, to restore transparency, and when he hesitated once more, her decision became irreversible. She would not let this be buried. If the monarch would not confront the truth, she would. And she knew exactly where to go next, with proof, with fury, and with full intention to expose everything to the one place that still held power over the royal institution's future. The palace could no longer contain the storm, especially when Anne took her next move straight to the Royal Advisory Council. Summoned under the guise of a routine gathering, the Royal Advisory Council faced a bombshell instead. As Anne laid out her case, sealed envelopes were passed, gasps were heard, and glances darted toward Catherine. Every face in the room bore the weight of what this revelation meant for the monarchy's moral credibility. The council chamber, once a place of ceremonial updates and meticulously rehearsed decisions, was now a battleground. Anne wasted no time. With clipped precision and cold resolve, she handed each council member a sealed envelope containing documented proof bank records, correspondence, coded letters, and the Queen Mother's handwritten directive. No one spoke at first. The silence was suffocating. Then the murmurs began. A few read in stunned silence, others flipped pages in disbelief. The Queen Mother's signature was undeniable. Her intent was beyond dispute. Catherine was the chosen heir not merely in sentiment, but in calculated legal finality. The accounts weren't speculative. They were active, real, and immeasurably vast. Sever. Al's senior members, some of whom had served the crown for decades, sat frozen. Lord Cranfield, a staunch traditionalist, leaned back and muttered, "This destabilizes everything." Lady Pembroke, ever the pragmatist, replied, "Or it clarifies what we've all known but dared not admit." The tension split the room. A few accused Anne of overstepping, of turning a private legacy into a public scandal, but Anne stood firm. If the Queen Mother believed in transparency, why hide it? And if she hid it, why now are we so afraid to face it? Her words landed like cannon fire. Camilla's allies, fewer than they once were, pushed back. The Queen Mother, they argued, had been well into her twilight years. Her judgment, they claimed, had declined. They hinted carefully but cruelly that senility might have influenced her decisions. But Anne was ready. She produced dated psychological assessments routine, but revealing that described the Queen Mother as mentally astute and sharper than most cabinet ministers. The room fell quiet again. Then came the moment no one expected. Catherine spoke. Calm, measured, but with a quiet strength that cut through every objection. "I never asked for this," she said, "but I won't turn away from it either, not when it was her wish." Her voice didn't tremble, her words weren't defensive, they were rooted in duty, and somehow that made them even more powerful. Even those opposed to her felt it the resonance of a future monarch who did not chase power, but bore it when it came to her. The council debated long into the afternoon. Was it right to reveal this to the public? Would it undermine the monarchy's already fragile credibility? Or would concealing it be the greater betrayal? The question wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust, about legacy, about whether the crown still had the moral authority to lead without fear of its own shadow. Finally, a vote was taken secret, anonymous, and when the results came in, it was clear a majority supported honouring the Queen Mother's wishes. The council would not oppose the inheritance, nor would it deny its legitimacy. But outside the palace walls, whispers became headlines, and the press circled like hawks smelling blood. By dawn, the tabloids were ablaze. Catherine's royal jackpot, Anne's explosive files, and Camilla cut out. Flooded newsstands. Loyalists were divided. Festers appeared at palace gates. And in living rooms across Britain, citizens wondered had the Queen Mother seen something in Catherine the rest had missed. What began as a quiet inheritance had now erupted into a full-blown national reckoning. Leaked documents made their way into the hands of journalists, each headline more damning than the last. Anchors whispered about hidden bank vaults and secret trusts with the urgency of wartime briefings. Social media descended into a frenzy. Hashtags like #Catherine crowned and #Camilla snubbed trended within hours. Some saw it as the ultimate vindication, a future queen entrusted by the most revered royal of her generation. Others weren't so kind. Murmurs of manipulation, of palace games and silent greed, painted Catherine in a colder light. Questions were hurled from every direction. Why didn't she speak sooner? Why accept an inheritance rooted in secrecy? Camilla's team scrambled for footing, launching a damage control campaign rooted in carefully crafted empathy. The Queen Mother was not of sound mind in her final days, leaked one aide anonymously to the press. Another hinted that the Queen Mother had been deeply misled by outside influences, but nothing landed with clarity. The narrative was shifting faster than they could steer. Then came the bombshell, an interview with a former palace housekeeper who had served both Queen Mother and Catherine. Her words echoed across the nation. There was always something between them. A trust, an understanding. The Queen Mother would speak to her as if Catherine was born into this, not married in. That single quote was reprinted in every major paper before lunchtime. Under pressure, Catherine broke her silence. In a statement released through Kensington Palace, she did not deny the inheritance. But she reframed it. "Legacy is not measured in gold, but in duty," she wrote. "I will honour the trust placed in me not by hiding, but by serving." It was brief, controlled, yet powerful enough to disarm some of the backlash. Her words struck a delicate balance, neither defiant nor apologetic. Meanwhile, Anne, the unlikely heroine of this saga, was hailed by many as the people's royal. Despite the storm she had unleashed, she had become a symbol of honesty within an institution long accused of secrecy. For the first time in years, the royal family was no longer one narrative, it was fractured, raw, human. The trust between monarch and public had been cracked open. But amid the chaos, one truth stood tall. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about legacy, legitimacy, and who held the right to carry the crown's most guarded truths into the future. But just as the storm peaked, a forgotten voice from the past resurfaced with a letter that would tilt the balance once more. It was hidden inside a first edition of Churchill's memoirs, tucked between pages worn by time and secrecy. A letter penned by the Queen Mother years before her death, never mailed, never seen until now. And in it, the reason behind her final decision was laid bare in haunting clarity. The letter was uncovered not by a royal, but by a quiet figure on the palace's outer rim. A retired royal librarian brought back to catalogue personal collections for archival preservation. It was meant to be a formality. Instead, it became a revelation. As he opened the cracked spine of the memoir, a faded envelope fell out, its edges curled with age, its seal broken long ago. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside were 3 handwritten pages addressed simply to Catherine, and what it contained sent a fresh wave of electricity through the veins of the already fractured monarchy. The Queen Mother's words were elegant, thoughtful, but also laced with a grief she had never spoken of publicly. She spoke of a world changing faster than tradition could keep up with, of watching the crown slip between relevance and pageantry. There will come a time, she wrote, when the crown must be guarded not with armour but with empathy. She expressed her fear not of outsiders but of insiders, of the monarchy falling into hands not tempered by sorrow, leaders who might reign with entitlement, not endurance. Then she turned to Catherine. Her words were personal, precise. She praised her gentle rebellion, her ability to honour the past while quietly reshaping the present. You carry not just the grace, she wrote, but the burden, and you do not flinch. What shook Anne most wasn't the praise, it was her own name. In a paragraph nestled between emotion and clarity, the Queen Mother called Anne the guardian of truth, the one who would know what to do should this letter ever find its way into the light. It was as if she had foreseen everything, the battle, the backlash, the reckoning, and had left behind not just instructions, but affirmation. She closed the letter with one line, simple but seismic. To you, Catherine, I entrust the part of the crown untouched by ceremony. When Anne read it aloud behind palace walls, there were no objections, just silence. Even Charles, once defiant, bowed his head. Camilla, absent from the room, issued no comment. The letter reframed the entire storm, turning scandal into destiny, conflict into confirmation. It wasn't just money, nor power, nor favoritism. It was legacy measured not by blood, but by belief. For the first time, the Queen Mother's voice echoed through the present, long after her passing. A final act not of division, but of definition. Now armed with clarity, the palace faced a defining moment, one final decision that would etch itself into royal history. In a televised address, the king stood alongside Anne and Catherine, shoulders heavy, eyes resolved. The Queen Mother's wishes were clear, Charles said, and we will honour them. A stunned world watched as the monarchy officially recognised Catherine as the exclusive beneficiary, and Anne as the executor of the Queen Mother's private legacy. The broadcast lasted only minutes, but its impact was seismic. For a family that had survived wars, abdications, and scandals, this moment carried a different weight, one of surrender to truth. The palace, once buried in secrecy and denial, finally acknowledged what had long been swirling through corridors and headlines. The inheritance, with all its legal complexity and emotional gravity, was legitimate, not just valid in documentation, but now validated by the crown itself. The Queen Mother's final decision was no longer a hidden clause, it was now royal decree, and with that, the monarchy crossed a threshold from silence into revelation. Anne was officially appointed as the ceremonial guardian of the Queen Mother's legacy holdings. It was a role born not of protocol, but of trust, a living testament to the late matriarch's faith in her daughter's incorruptible spine. For a royal, often overlooked in matters of succession, this moment became a quiet crowning. She accepted the responsibility with characteristic restraint, but those close to her knew the truth. Anne had not just exposed a secret, she had preserved a legacy. And in doing so, she had redefined her place in royal history, not as heir or spare, but as the keeper of the crown's conscience. Catherine, too, took the stage not with triumph, but with grace. In a private meeting with royal auditors, she declined a significant portion of the funds, redirecting them to foundations and causes the Queen Mother had once championed: veterans, children's hospitals, rural cultural preservation. The gesture, though discreet, was impossible to ignore. Newspapers that once accused her of silent greed now called her a steward of dignity. Public sentiment shifted almost overnight. Polls surged. Commentators recalibrated. The nation, once suspicious, now watched her with a new reverence. But as admiration bloomed in one corner of the palace, tension simmered in another. Camilla, notably absent from the televised statement, was later seen leaving a royal engagement abruptly, her expression unreadable. No official reason was given, but speculation erupted. Whispers spoke of fallout behind closed doors, of strained conversations and icy silences. For a queen consort whose position once felt cemented, the ground now trembled beneath her feet. And through it all, Anne remained a quiet sentinel, her influence growing not through headlines, but through proximity, principle, and undeniable truth. For the first time in a generation, the monarchy's centre of gravity had subtly shifted. Not to those who shouted the loudest, but to those who carried the heaviest truths with unshakable resolve. But one mystery remained unsolved, because buried deep within the Queen Mother's original trust was a name no one expected. As legal teams combed through the Queen Mother's estate, one clause stunned even Anne, a secondary heir, named only by code. The identity remains encrypted, locked behind a cipher known only to one former aide now missing. And so, the final chapter of the Queen Mother's secret empire remains unwritten. For now, it was buried deep within an annex of the trust, overlooked until a junior solicitor flagged the odd phrasing, should the primar Y vessel be found unsuitable or incapacitated, the secondary steward known herein as the one who waits in silence shall assume full rights of continuity, no name, no address, only a series of numbers that, according to palace archivists, corresponded to a ciphered identity created by a trusted aide who vanished shortly after the Queen Mother's funeral. The discovery was like striking a live wire beneath a still settling ground. The ink had barely dried on Catherine's confirmation before the institution was once again engulfed in questions, this time with no clear path to answers. Rumours ignited instantly. Was this a failsafe, a rival heir, a shadow contingency born of fear or foresight? And most provocatively, was this heir still within the family? Fingers quietly pointed to the unlikeliest of figures. Princess Beatrice, long underestimated. Lady Louise, discreet yet increasingly present in quiet royal duties. Even Zara Tyndall, often described as outside but never truly absent, emerged as a possibility. Theories flourished but none with proof. The cipher resisted every decoding attempt, and with the aid gone, so was the key, at least for now. The press, hungry for a second storm, returned with sharpened teeth. Heir in hiding, they asked. Queen Mother's final curveball? Headlines turned speculative, but the tone was more breathless than mocking. The possibility that the Queen Mother had safeguarded not just one legacy but two electrified the nation. Catherine maintained her silence. Anne, however, did not. She stood before a closed-door gathering of royal historians and made her stance clear. If the Queen Mother planted a final mystery, I intend to solve it. The corridors of power are never truly quiet. They echo with unfinished stories and unread intentions. And in this tale, the pen may have paused, but the ink has not yet run dry. Because in the royal house of Windsor, one truth always holds: every crown casts a long shadow. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.